One of the hardest things to grieve is something you never really had. Not a person who died, or a relationship that ended, or a friend that moved away, but the quiet realization that the parent you needed was never really there. The grief of an emotionally absent parent is something that doesn't get talked about very often, because from the outside, it can look like you still have a parent. They're still alive. They may even say they love you, but something fundamental is missing. And at some point, you begin to realize that it's something you can't fix and that it will likely never change. As a quick content note, I want to share that I am going to be talking about family dysfunction and emotional harm in this video. So just take care of yourself as you listen. For me, the realization that I would never have the mother that I deserved didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly until the moment where I had that realization, and it hit me kind of all at once. It was around the time that I got custody of my sisters. I was trying to protect them. I was trying to create something stable for them. And at the same time, my mother was becoming more and more manipulative. I had never expected her to be that way, but she began telling them horrible things, like that she would hurt herself if they didn't come home, telling them that it was their fault the family was broken. She was putting this intense emotional pressure on these girls in a way that they should never have had to carry. There was constant conflict, constant deflection, and her trying to rewrite history. Before official custody was granted, she was playing these really manipulative games, refusing to sign permission slips or medical health waivers, and she even threatened to report me for kidnapping if I took the girls away to Lake Tahoe for Christmas. I remember spending hours and hours and hours, conversations, emails, trying to explain, trying to show her what actually happened, trying to get her to see it, trying to get her to believe us, because a part of me believed, or perhaps desperately hoped, that if she understood, then she would choose us. But she never did. For a long time, I didn't want to believe that. And then there was a moment that it finally hit me. Not that she was just making bad choices, but that she wasn't willing to protect her children. Not if it meant sacrificing something that she wanted. One day, I had to give my mother an ultimatum. I was so tired and I was so angry. The girls had come home again, sobbing, wailing that our mother had told them that she would hurt herself if they didn't come home. And I snapped. This behavior, this was selfish, horrible, terrible, damaging behavior, was so incredibly wrong. And I just couldn't speak. I was so mad. I told her that if the girls came home crying one more time, that I would cut off all contact with her and that she would not be able to talk to them or see them until they turned 18, and then they could decide for themselves if they wanted to have a relationship with her. I reminded her that even the court investigator had expressed serious concern about her manipulative behavior and the emotional harm that she was causing my girls, and that investigator did not recommend visitation with her at all. I reminded her that she has no rights to see them because I am the parent now, and while she didn't protect them, I was going to. I was not going to watch them suffer with unhealthy visitation. I refused to tolerate her bringing any more pain and sadness and harm into my home because I was the one responsible for them now. I was the angry mama bear, and just because I didn't birth them didn't mean I wasn't going to protect them. And honestly, for a while, I thought that these dynamics would just make me feel angry forever. But what I eventually realized was that underneath that anger was grief. I've always thought of my mind having these switches in it, rows and rows of light switches. I'm very slow to anger, but once I do, or a serious decision has made and that switch flips, it's not flipping back again. Around the time of setting these boundaries with my mother, a switch flipped. It did. I was done trying to entertain her or convince her of her delusions. I mostly cut her off at that point, but I did allow some contact because that is what the girls wanted. But I watched closely, and I intervened if she crossed that line again, even a little. Years later, once the girls became adults, I went 100% no contact. I stopped responding to emails and phone calls. I stopped engaging with her. I refused and gave back gifts that she sent. And I only call her by her first name now, in the rare situation we have to engage. Because emotionally, she stopped feeling like a mother a long time ago. Cutting her off was glorious. It felt like this huge weight was lifted from my chest. I no longer had to carry the weight of a relationship that was constantly harmful to me. Someone who blamed me for all of her hardships and pain instead of the person who was truly responsible. I was finally free. And I gave myself the gift of allowing myself not to feel guilty for that decision. There's a specific kind of grief that comes from that realization, the realization that you don't really have a parent. It's not just grief for what happened, it's a grief for what never existed. The parent you had hoped for, the parent you needed, the version of them that you kept believing would show up someday, but it never would because it doesn't exist. The grief is complicated because there's no real end to it. There's no moment where everyone comes together and gathers and acknowledges the loss, like at a funeral or a memorial service. It's just something you carry quietly within yourself. I still have moments where I wish for a relationship with my mother. But the problem is, it isn't my mother. I'm longing for something that doesn't exist. I'm longing for a person that doesn't exist. And that's a really disorienting kind of grief because there's really nowhere to direct it. There's no version of them to go back to. There are moments where I cry and I grieve, but most of the time it's just a small sadness hidden in the back of my heart. Hidden and mostly invisible and not thought about much, until something comes up and it reminds me of the figure I didn't have in my own life. A lot of us don't recognize this situation as hopeless at first. Like me, you probably thought, if I explain it better, they'll understand, or if I'm patient enough, they'll change, or if I just keep trying, ... And so we stay in that cycle, trying to prove something, trying to be heard, and trying to be believed. I spent years doing that, trying to explain to my mother that what was happening was real, trying to convince her we weren't lying, that she needed to step in. But honestly, no amount of explaining can make someone choose something that they're not willing to choose, or to be the parent that you need. And that's the part that's really hard to accept. At some point, it stops being about whether they can change. It becomes about whether they will change. And if the answer is no, then you're left with a very different kind of decision. Not, how do I fix this? Because you can't. But what do I do with this truth of who they are? For me, a big part of that grief wasn't even about me. It was about watching my sisters, watching how much it hurt them that their mom wasn't stepping up in the way they needed, watching them try to make sense of it. Even now, it shows up in different ways. We've had conversations about how hard it is not to trust your own parent with your children, to know that they will never be able to have sleepovers with grandma because there's no trust that it will be safe, to wish you had a mother you could rely on, and to know that you don't. That kind of loss doesn't just stay in childhood. It follows you into adulthood, into your relationships, into parenting. And there's something deeply unfair about it, because the ones who are hurt are the ones who end up having to adjust their entire lives around it. Where I've landed with it is this. I've accepted that I don't have parents that can love me the way I needed. And that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It does hurt. There are still moments where I feel that small twinge of jealousy when I see people with loving and supportive families. That doesn't just go away. And honestly, I don't think it ever will. But what has changed is that I've stopped trying to make it different. I've stopped trying to fix something that isn't mine to fix. Because the truth is, you can't force someone to become the person you need them to be, no matter how much you explain and no matter how much you hope, unfortunately. Healing for me didn't look like some magical, everything is okay now situation. It looked like creating distance, setting boundaries, and eventually letting go of the expectation entirely. I've cut off contact almost completely, and I'm so much happier than I was before when I was still trying to have a relationship with her. And that peace is invaluable. And so now we have chosen family. I think people use the phrase chosen family a lot to explain their support system. But what they don't talk about is how unfamiliar that can feel at first. When you didn't grow up around consistent, healthy love, it can actually feel uncomfortable when you first experience it. You don't always trust it right away. You don't always recognize it. But over time, you learn what it feels like to be around people who are actually safe. People who don't manipulate you, who don't make you question your reality. And that becomes your foundation. I have my own chosen family, and it's a mix of actual family members, but many more friends. And I still struggle with trust and love, and feeling like they're really there for me. But I also know that the evidence suggests that they are there for me, and that fear and anxiety aren't always telling me the truth. If this is something you're grieving, not the parent that you lost, but the parent you never really had, I just want you to know it makes sense that it hurts this much, because you weren't just losing a relationship, you're letting go of the hope that it one day might possibly become what you needed. And that is a real loss, and it is okay to grieve it. Thank you for being here with me. I'm Janae Cherie, and I hope that my stories help you to tell yours. If this story meant something to you, you're welcome to stick around and subscribe. I'll be sharing more about healing and life after trauma.